Good afternoon, everybody. This is a live emergency update as we have some big time breaking news. We have our first EF5 tornado since 2013. This has just been upgraded by the National Weather Service in Grand Forks to an EF5. This is from June 2025 of this year in North Dakota. This tornado had estimated winds of greater than 210 miles per hour. It also carried some full grain cars from a train, rolled those in an empty tanker, actually carried it 475.5 feet through the air. There was a sandpapering effect on the vegetation too, especially in the trees that were damaged in the river valleys up there. Big time winds. And you can see this very smooth appearance to the tornado and this Liberty Bell look right here. It's convective, laminar at the same time, very smooth. This definitely looks like an EF5 tornado. And then within all of this structure, there is a pipe in there, a dynamic pipe, a big time tornado that's in there showing deviant motion. This thing moved off to the north, very similar to the Greensburg, Kansas tornado of May 4, 2007. And once they occlude from the mesocyclone and start that journey off to the north, that's oftentimes where they reach peak intensity. And this photo was captured by security cam footage in Enderlin, North Dakota. This was the southernmost supercell of a pair of renegade supercells that developed just ahead of a surging bow echo or a derecho. And a lot of times when those bow echoes will run into those renegade supercells, they'll increase the low-level wind shear and make them capable of very big things. And that's exactly what happened with this tornado. And you can see the classic hook-shaped turn. It reached its maximum width of greater than a mile wide right here, just as it was showing that deviant motion and starting to turn off to the north. When these strong, powerful tornadoes occlude from the mesocyclone, they'll get picked up by the low-level jet and begin that deviant motion, that turn off to the left. And as they get a little bit more shallow from the mesocyclone, they'll feel those low-level winds a lot more. Even those easterlies as the tornado begins to dissipate, and you can see it did that little hook shape. These are the worst case scenarios because you get a very long duration of those extreme winds. And if there are any suction vortices within this tornado, then those wind speeds likely reach 2 to 4 times that of the parent tornado. So winds could even have been approaching the speed of sound in here. That's why you have the 210 plus mile per hour wind estimate. But you can see the tornado is moving off to the northeast initially, just with the mean wind and the mesocyclone. And then as it occluded from the mesocyclone, as that clear slot wraps around the dynamic pipe, separating it from the parent rotating updraft, it will get picked up by the southerly winds. And it started to make that northward turn right here. You can see the northward turn that's happening, and then eventually did a hook all the way around. And this tornado reached a max width of 1.05 miles on the ground for over 12 miles. And this was a nighttime tornado, as you saw from that footage as well, touching down just after 11 o'clock. That was when that tornado first touched down, was on the ground for about 20 minutes. Making sure that I am still live here. This is live breaking news, folks. And we are going to go through the public information statement that came out this morning from National Weather Service Grand Forks. You can see that classic left-hand turn. There were root balls from these trees, and they couldn't find out where they came from. They got carried very far, those root balls that were happening out there. Here is some of the text from the National Weather Service. Grand Forks upgraded to EF5. Very strong tornado, might even be one of the strongest ever up there. I mean, you had the Bridge Creek, Oklahoma tornado, May 3rd, 99 with a 308 mile per hour wind measured just above the ground. That is arguably one of the strongest in history, especially because it was moving more slowly. The Dixie Alley tornadoes are moving at 50 to 60 miles an hour, so you definitely have to factor in the forward speed of the tornado because slower tornadoes, obviously the winds last a lot longer, and this occlusion that happens with a tornado like that is also the worst case scenario for the Dominator 3. That was when we had that hydraulics failure in Custer City, Oklahoma. And I was worried about this scenario where the tornado occludes or weakens right on top of you. Even though it's weakening, getting separated from the mesocyclone in terms of its life cycle and maturation, it can have stronger winds because it can get a lot more compact as that tornado continues to get stretched and gets a lot more narrow. And the winds will last a lot longer too as it undergoes that occlusion process. So It would be an absolute nightmare to intercept a tornado like this and have this slow motion, deviant motion happen right on top of you while you're experiencing 210 plus mile per hour winds for a very long period of time. Very sadly, this had 3 fatalities with this tornado. We were on the Spiritwood, North Dakota tornado. There's a pair of supercells. We were on the northernmost supercell, and that one also showed deviant motion. And then it hit a farmhouse, and we had to shift into search and rescue mode. Anytime you see damage as a storm chaser, it's very important to shift into that search and rescue mode and drop the chase. And we saw the backside of the southern supercell just as it was about to produce that tornado, electrified backside of that supercell storm. And this setup, as we've mentioned, the meteorological setup of this event is classic for big time tornadoes. This is from Kyle Gillette. Incredible graphics that he does, and you can see the classic easterlies at the low levels beneath westerlies aloft. And anytime you get this during the summertime months, you can see those wind barbs just to the left of my drawing that's happening. Let me slide that over a little bit. You had some decent westerlies, not as strong as you get in the early spring in Dixie Alley, but strong enough when you're over easterly winds at 20 to 30 knots. It's very easy to get that bulk shear for a nearly stationary supercell storm, a slow moving one, and you get incredible low level wind shear too, and you get a little cyclonic curvature to the upper level trough. That will give you just enough juice to get a low level jet on top of those easterlies. There you can see the easterly winds at the low levels beneath a southerly low level jet at 850 millibars, flipping around a westerly aloft, and it leads to these really elongated meat hook shaped hodographs, where in the lowest 3 kilometers you have easterlies, and then aloft you have these westerly winds, and that's what stretches out the hodograph. But you also have strong magnitudes, wind magnitudes out there too. So that's when you get an upper level trough superimposed with an outflow boundary. You get overnight convection that will happen, an overnight blob of storms that leaves behind an outflow boundary that will cook in the summertime heat and moisture. And that leads to these very unstable, strongly sheared profiles. Look at the big cape up here. You have a little bit of a capping inversion that held convective initiation until the evening, and then that storm popped just as the upper level energy ejected. Loaded gun sounding, we call this, because as the temperature heats up and the moisture builds below the cap, once the temperature gets hot enough, boom, the cap breaks and you get a big time explosion of a storm. And that is exactly what happened with this tornado, EF5 tornado. We are going to read through the public information statement. This is a historic moment here, folks. Thank you for tuning in to this live update. Here is the public information statement from the National Weather Service Grand Forks. An incredible work by the wind experts out there. Jim Ledoux, Tim Marshall was involved in this, and this was the first tornado produced in the Enderlin area. It cycled really quickly, produced another tornado that moved a little bit more easterly to the east of this one that wasn't quite as strong. But here you can read some of the text here. The estimated maximum wind of the Enderlin, North Dakota tornado number 1 is greater than 210 miles an hour and occurred during the time of the train derailment south of Enderlin. The analysis involved forensic damage wind speed estimates for tipping several fully loaded grain hopper cars, lofting of tanker cars, including one empty tanker car that was tossed about 475.5 feet. Maximum wind speed also correlates to the maximum strength on the nearby radar, even though that was scanning just above the ground. A lot of times, suction vortices in these tornadoes can ramp the winds 2 to 4 times that of the main vortex. So we likely had wind speeds that were approaching the speed of sound if those suction vortices were happening, and I promise you they were, because of that complex interaction of a strong tornado with a frictional lower boundary condition. And there are a lot of rolling hills out there, some trees as well. So you're definitely going to change that frictional coefficient at the low levels throughout its life cycle. And you're also going to change the nature of the interaction of the dynamic pipe with the ground, depending on its intensity and life cycle. And a lot of times the wind will funnel in through those gaps in the terrain too. There was some crazy vegetation analysis on this. Additional high-end damage indicators that have been reanalyzed and adjusted to include damage to the trees near the Maple River east of Enderlin and damage to Farmstead number 2 on Highway 46. Further analysis of the trees surrounding the Maple River show extensive tree damage throughout the entire river valley, as that wind was likely funneling right up the valley with only stubs of large branches or trunks remaining and debarking with a sandpapering effect. So you get that sand and dirt and rocks moving at 200 plus miles per hour, and you have enough of them, it'll lead to that sandpapering effect of the trees. Really smooth, debarked appearance of the trees. Trees with attached root ball displacements were noted, including one where the original location could not be determined. Wind damage expert analyses helped determine the damage at farmstead number 2 to be complete destruction, with the foundation considered to be swept clean. Debris swept downwind and scattered. That would normally be an EF5 rating. However, issues surrounding the lack of proper anchoring, anchor bolts, will limit the overall rating in that area. So probably was an EF5, but the engineering didn't support that as an EF5 damage indicator. Trees around the farmstead were also debarked and root ball displacements. National Weather Service Grand Forks would like to thank the wind experts, Tim Marshall, great friend of mine, Jim Ledoux, Dr. Connell Miller, Dr. Greg Kopp, Dr. David Sills of the Canadian contingent Northern Tornadoes Project at Western University. This thing was on the ground for over 12 miles, 12.10 miles. Start time 11:02 Central Daylight Time in the PM. So that was that second supercell. You had two supercells that developed ahead of an ejecting bow echo, and a lot of times the wind shear will ramp up even more compared to that photograph that I showed you. It likely even humped it out even more. Greater velocities around that perfectly shaped photograph. You kind of get a high plains-like photograph with big summertime moisture with a trough coming in as well that increases the magnitudes from the low levels all the way aloft. And that's how you get a big tornado like that. Here is the warm blob, the North Pacific Oscillation. We have been talking about this thing for years. About 3 years ago, we had the beginning of a 10-year cycle of active tornadoes across North America with the emergence of this positive phase North Pacific Oscillation. Anytime you have that warm blob in the North Pacific, you get big tornado seasons downstream in North America, and that's exactly what we've had since 2023. A lot of times during the winter, the warm phase NPO will recoil back near Japan, and that's with weakening upwelling up there, likely due to the atmospheric circulation over it. And it will recoil back near Japan and then migrate east of the dateline during the spring and summer months. That's exactly what happened again this year, and probably what's going to happen again for the next 5 to 7 years. I think we're going to have 5 to 7 more years of these active tornado seasons, and it's all related to this warm blob in the North Pacific that encourages troughing downstream in North America. For many years, people thought that the overlying atmosphere was the big driver of sea surface temperature anomalies in the North Pacific, but you can clearly see that it's internally driven from those upwelling anomalies near Japan during the winter time, and then it migrates to the east during the spring months as the westerlies accelerate up there and lift back off to the north. And this helps to encourage a general shape in the flow with ridging over the Pacific, downstream troughing. And that's how we had over 70 tornadoes in North Dakota in 2025 already, and we haven't even finished the fall season yet. Record-breaking year up there in North Dakota. And down in the subtropics and tropical Pacific, you have the dance of El Nino and La Nina down there. We're in a neutral condition right now, but we are watching the emergence of another La Nina that could happen this winter. If that extends into the spring, that will push the severe weather into Dixie Alley and the Mid-South once again next year, just like what happened in the early spring in 2025. And then we lost the La Nina in the tropical Pacific. It went more to neutral, and that brought the severe weather back to the Great Plains, back to the heart of Tornado Alley. If you have an El Nino down here in the tropical Pacific, it'll push the severe weather closer to the mountains into the high plains, like what we saw in 2023 with the Texas Panhandle up to Alberta being active. And then in 2024, it pushed east into the heart of the Great Plains. This year, it started in Dixie Alley with that La Nina in the early spring and then shifted into the Great Plains. But sea surface temperature patterns like this and pattern recognition are at the root of our seasonal forecasts every year for tornadoes. And we definitely nailed the last three because we are plugged in to the decadal variability that happens with the climate system. And I think that we've got another 5 to 7 more years of active tornado seasons. It's very difficult to get a big tornado season and a big hurricane season at the same time. last year was a little bit of a rare occurrence with the active hurricanes. I think that we were sputtering out of our active 10-year cycle for hurricanes that began 2016 into 2017. And we're sputtering in to this active 10-year cycle for tornadoes. But sometimes there can be a little bit of an overlap in there as well. But I do believe that that is at the root of our active tornado seasons. Here is a look at that EF5 tornado near Enderlin, North Dakota. Again, you could just see the classic smooth shapes, structure within structure of this tornado. You can see this very smooth round disc above it. That's probably more of the lower part of the dynamic pipe, or at least some condensation on the outside of it. The dynamic pipe is actually in the middle here. You have a cylindrical like tornado vortex, has a little bit of sinking air around the outside of some of these smooth laminar features, including that Liberty Bell type appearance. But this is a mature tornado near peak intensity captured by that security cam. And this has been upgraded to an EF5 with maximum winds of greater than 210 miles per hour indicated. And just like the Greensburg EF5 that happened on May 4, 2007, that classic northward turn, turning cyclonically and then anchoring over Enderlin. So you also get those wind speeds that will last a lot longer. It's very difficult than like a Mayfield, Kentucky tornado that's moving a lot faster, December of 2021. That one arguably was similar intensity out there, but it was moving a lot faster. So the prevalence of those winds is a little bit shorter in duration with a faster moving tornado versus one that's stationary, that just plants right on top of you. Definitely could not have handled this one in the Dominator, certainly. So thank you to National Weather Service Grand Forks and the wind damage experts that were involved in this. This is a historic moment here. This is our first EF5 tornado since 2013. The one that almost hit my house in Moore, Oklahoma in 2013 there. Moore has actually been hit by two F5s, an EF5 and an F5. The May 3rd, 1999 tornado that we chased from underneath the overpass. And then that one on May 20, 2013 that missed my house by a mile, hitting Moore, Oklahoma there. That one also had deviant motion with it as well. As often these tornadoes do in the Great Plains, when they occlude from the mesocyclone, they'll get picked up by that low-level jet, carried off to the north, and oftentimes they'll even do a little bit of a cyclonic curvature that will happen. So this was one tornado of over 70 that happened in the state of North Dakota this year. And Kyle Gillette is doing incredible work up there, coming up from Central Michigan University, just does these incredible graphics. This shows you the environment that those storms were experiencing. And as that bow echo approached these two supercell storms from the west, the northern one is near Spiritwood, the southern one's just getting going. And they actually did a little Fujiwara interaction too, as the northern one dissipated, and then the southern one took over and anchored just ahead of that bow echo. So you likely increased the velocities of this hodograph even further as that bow echo approached. You likely expanded that hodograph quite a bit as the low-level jet there accelerated just ahead of that bow echo, likely giving you a nice hump in the hodograph, about 500 meters up to a kilometer above ground. But this profile leads to these classic hodographs. You have easterlies in the lowest 3 kilometers, beneath westerlies aloft, big instability and moisture as well, leading to these very powerful, nearly stationary storms that are capable of even producing mega wedge tornadoes. So thank you everybody for tuning in to this live emergency update. I am going to be shifting in to my off-season mode here soon with live updates, and we are going to offer an educational experience into storm chasing. I'm going to share with you my pattern recognition based forecast methods as well during the off-season. That's going to be for the Team Dominator members for those live updates. Thank you everybody for tuning in. I will do a more detailed analysis on this event as well, looking at radar and the exact hodographs as they respond to that bow echo as they're approaching those two renegade supercell storms. We're in Nashville, Tennessee right now. We have a Team Dominator show tomorrow night at the City Winery here at 7:30 p.m. This is all in support of our science mission, our first ever Team Dominator fall tour. And we scheduled this realizing it was going to be a dud of a hurricane season in 2025. That's why we scheduled the Team Dominator first ever fall tour in 2025, because we are locked in to seasonal forecasting. That's what I did in grad school for 12 years. Went to University of Oklahoma for 17 straight years, continuously enrolled. And the one thing I learned, especially in there, in addition to being able to derive all the equations and learning the fundamentals of meteorology, is seasonal forecasting, because a lot of my grad school research was in the seasonal forecasting of big weather, especially warm season weather. So there's the EF5, folks, the first EF5 in 12 years, ending the drought. Even though I do think that Rolling Fork and Mayfield probably were EF5 tornadoes, we have to realize that it is a damage-based scale out there. So big update, EF5 tornado, classic deviant motion, similar to the Greensburg, Kansas tornado. And not surprisingly, it happened during one of those setups that lead to these biggest, strongest tornadoes and sometimes mega wedges. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. Never stop chasing.